Yahya a chargé son pistolet.
Then Yahya loaded his gun and turned towards us. He said, "You'd better go away." So we got up like robots, and all the time I was staring at Yannick and praying.
Là, la France est touchée directement par l'intermédiaire de ce Français.
France had now been directly affected. This guy was just on his way home to spend Christmas with his wife and children.
Donc ça nous a, je dirais, donné.
This only strengthened our determination.
Ça n'a pas été de la haine.
It wasn't hatred. It was the desire to stop these people.
Vouloir vraiment arrêter ces gens-là.
With the death of a third hostage and the threat of another execution every 30 minutes, the Algerian authorities decided to wash their hands of the escalating crisis. They finally agreed to allow the plane to leave for France. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the Algerians recovered the bodies of the 3 dead hostages.
Yannick let us escape from Algiers, and this was very important, to escape from the ninjas, to escape from the government, the militaries and so on, and to find back the hope.
Crew and passengers were still in the dark about what the hijackers planned to do. They'd no idea that for the hijackers, the plane was to become a weapon of mass destruction. The GIGN had to do 2 things: rescue the hostages and prevent the hijackers from reaching their target. At 1 a.m. on the 3rd day, Yahya's demands were finally met. The staircases were taken away and the plane took off, but not for Paris.
You need around 20 tons of fuel to get to Paris. But once you've been stuck on the ground for a couple of days, your reserves go down. You need fuel for the air conditioning, for electricity, for the coffee machines, and with 200 people on board, it's used up quickly.
The plane only had enough fuel to fly as far as Marseille, but once it landed there, it was absolutely clear in our minds that the plane would not be going anywhere else.
The GIGN had arrived in Marseille only 20 minutes ahead of the hijacked plane. It landed just after 3 a.m.
It seemed unreal. The Airbus arrived just like any other plane. It was hard to believe that anything out of the ordinary was taking place inside. It was hard to believe that there were hostages and terrorists on board.
The hijackers were now on French soil and in French hands. The GIGN team was led by Denis Favier.
We knew the airport. We were already in place. The crisis center had already been set up. The authorities were already there. The negotiators were ready. So in a way, the terrorists were walking straight into our trap.
In the control tower, trained negotiators were ready, led by Alain Guérin.
My first task was to make it clear to the pilot that there wouldn't be another destination after Marseille, that this was the final destination. The crisis would be resolved one way or another in Marseille.
Yahya was furious. and was in no mood to play games.
C'est nous qui on décide, c'est pas vous ou le commandant de bord. C'est nous qui décide. Tu vas payer très cher, vous et votre...
Non, je vous en supplie, surtout ne faites rien, surtout ne faites rien.
Yahya demanded 27 tons of fuel, 3 times the amount needed to fly to Paris.
We told the terrorists we would bring them some fuel, but we explained that we were having some technical problems, that we didn't have enough tankers to transport it. We told them various things to gain time, so that got us through to the end of the morning.
The negotiations went on for hours as a GIGN special operations team went to work.
You need information about the position of the hostages, their weapons, how the doors open, and you can't get all this information in just a few hours. It requires work over a long period.
En fait, les premiers renseignements intéressants, c'est quand le jour s'est levé.
We got the first piece of useful information from the plane at dawn, because the marksmen could then see what was going on inside the plane through their binoculars.
La position du chef.
They were also able to determine the position of the leader and get physical descriptions of the hijackers.
Un des terroristes.
Inside the plane, the hostages felt abandoned.
Mais à Marseille, là où nous étions,
In Marseille, we couldn't see anyone or anything.
et on avait l'impression
We felt as if we were in a desert, and there was nobody, absolutely nobody to help us. And I found this just too much. I thought they were all celebrating their Christmas and they'd forgotten all about us.
quand même fort.
At 4 p.m., Yahya selected 2 elderly hostages, a couple in their 70s, and asked them to move to the back of the plane. As they disappeared from view, the other hostages had no idea what was going to happen to them.
At precisely 4:05 p.m., the rear left-hand door of the plane opened, and these 2 elderly people came down the steps.
We got some very detailed information from them about weapons, the actual number of terrorists, what they were wearing, and the hierarchy within the group. We knew that the leader was in the cockpit, and that his second in command was often in there with him.
The negotiators had managed to keep the terrorists calm for 13 hours. But Yahya had now had enough. He made a final demand for fuel.
Tu m'entends?
Oui, oui, je vous entends.
Et maintenant, on vous donnera jusqu'à 1 heure. 1 heure, et cette fois, vous verrez, ou vous prendrez la responsabilité, toute la responsabilité.
Parce que aussi, il n'avait pas d'autre.
He only had one thought, one idea. I want to go to Paris. Give me my fuel. Otherwise, you'll pay a high price. End of dialogue.
Yahya made it clear that if the fuel didn't arrive before the deadline, the killing of the hostages would begin again. He then cut all radio contact. As the minutes ticked by, Yahya realized that he was never going to get to Paris. But he decided they could still become martyrs here in Marseille. They would blow up the plane on the tarmac. They made themselves ready for paradise.
Ils ont commencé à lire le Coran.
They started to read verses from the Quran out loud.
Et ces versets
And these verses were all about death.
parlaient de
We shall die. God is waiting for you. We shall die as warriors. Everything to do with death.
5 o'clock, only minutes to the deadline.
There was this deathly silence. It was now very clear that we were all about to die.
The GIGN were waiting for their moment.
We know they're heavily armed, that they're likely to use explosives. So we're thinking, as soon as we walk in there, it's going to be fireworks, a real fight. It's special. There was emotion.